Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of thisishcd. Today in the show we have Genevieve Gaudet of Nava, and we speak about the work that they do as the Director of Design, which is centered around helping to improve access to critical government services for the people of America. Now we speak about the allure over working in big tech whilst being so closely located to San Francisco. They're based in Los Angeles, where potentially you could earn a lot more money and work on cool products or services versus the type of work that they do at Nava and that Genevieve and the team work on day in, day out. Genevieve is awesome. Let's jump in. Maybe we'll kick off. I know you're from Nava, which we're going to get to in more information, in more detail, should I say, in a few minutes. But maybe we'll start off. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and what you do.
Sure. My name is Genevieve Gaudet. My pronouns are she, her. I currently live in Los Angeles, California, but grew up in New Orleans, so the deep south of the U.S., and lived in New York for a while, where I actually worked for the mayor of New York City and co-founded a service design studio in Mayor de Blasio's office.
That's right.
There, and focused on getting the 8 million New Yorkers that we had, the benefits that they were entitled to if they were struggling and needed help paying food or getting housing, things like that. And then when I left the mayor's office, went and joined a company called Nava, which is where I am today and where I get to be Director of Design for research and development over there.
Very good. I didn't realize that connection with New York. And I remember Mari Nakano.
Yeah.
We were emailing, I don't know, at some point, what year is it? 2024? A couple of years ago anyway. We were back and forth because I think they'd left the mayor's office around that time. But it is a small world, and the service design world is even smaller than that. So, how long have you been at Nava, have you said?
I have been at Nava for almost 7 years.
7 years? Wow, okay, yeah.
By far and away the longest job I've ever had.
Yeah, and you're in, sunny California as well, which is an awful place to live. 300 and something days of sun every single year, which is ridiculous, But I'll be honest, before we spoke, I hadn't really heard of Nava because I'm obviously based in Ireland and lived in Australia. And when the email came through about potentially doing a podcast with Nava and yourself, of course, I was intrigued. How do you describe it to people when you're out for dinner? Say, what do you do and what does Nava do?
Yeah, well, I usually ask if they remember when Barack Obama was in office.
Who's he? Am I joking?
Yeah. Well, first we need to go to Wikipedia. We'll do a background on Obama. So back in 2013, President Obama's administration passed the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, to expand health insurance coverage for Americans. And famously, this came with trying to launch a website called healthcare.gov, which would be one of the main ways that people could sign up for health insurance. And it did not work. The day came and the website didn't launch.
I do remember this story, actually.
Yeah. And so Nava's co-founders were recruited by the Obama administration in 2013, along with a bunch of other really excellent technologists to help fix healthcare.gov. And so that team got it working again, got it up and running. And that was sort of the seed where Nava came from. And from there, we have expanded and we work in a number of agencies, all in the U.S. right now, but at the federal, state, and even sometimes the local level to do things like that, to either get systems that are not working again, or improve them or expand them. We've gotten to build some from scratch, which is really cool in government. We don't often get to do that. But yeah, that's Nava.
Okay, so that's it in a nutshell. Okay. But is it a kind of a consultancy in that sense for government agencies to get better outcomes for people, or how does it work?
That's right. So we have an interdisciplinary team of designers, engineers, product folks, really good project managers, and we're helping agencies make their services, simpler, more effective, more accessible. And we've done this, on a big scale with agencies like the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So this is
Hmm.
the federal agency in the U.S. that manages our big public health insurance programs, to places like the VA, which is where we help veterans access, anything from healthcare to other kinds of services. Then we've also done, much smaller scale projects like with the city of New York, for instance, or things like that.
Very good. You seem so like somebody who has, um, a deep sense of why they do this work. It just seems to exude from whenever we've spoken before. Where does this come from your perspective? Like, surely with your skill set, you could end up working you're in LA, you're not too far from, the mecca of tech, as I call it, the Valley or San Francisco. Why work for an organization like Nava for someone like you, Genevieve? What is it about it?
Thank you for asking that. Well, um, just sort of referencing all these things that happened in the US back in
Yeah.
the early 2000s. Do you recall in 2005, there was a very serious hurricane that
Hmm.
hit the Gulf South of the United States, Hurricane
That's
Katrina.
right.
It hit New Orleans. And I was actually supposed to start college that day
Oh, really?
in New Orleans. I'd grown up there, so it was already in my hometown. Yeah, and I was supposed to start college at
Wow.
Tulane University, a private university there. So it was really the first event of my adult life. Was the city I lived in was just totally, flattened.
Devastated.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Um, and when the city opened back up, I, as a very, very young adult, had some notion that I wanted to be a medical doctor. Um, and there was a pretty severe shortage of medical staff at the time in
Hmm.
the city. So I became an EMT, which is like, if you call like emergency services in the
Hmm.
US, 911, those are the people that will show up and help you and get you to the hospital. And I actually did that for about 4 years during my undergrad. And so it was super up close to what
Yeah.
it looks like when your whole public health system has just is
Hmm.
totally dysfunctional. Um, and just stuck around. I figured out I didn't want to be a doctor pretty quickly, but I did want to do something about it,
Yeah.
about some of the issues I was seeing. And, you know, tech is much more comfortable than taking people to the
Yeah.
hospital alone. Yeah.
But what is it about like working for Nava in particular? Like there are other consultancies out there that really do something similar, but like it seems like the team size, like one of the things, folks, before we get on the call, is like there's a lot of people working in Nava at the moment. There's,
Yeah.
you think you said 400 people, so
Almost.
almost four, but we'll call it 390.
There we
uh,
go.
but there's a lot of people working there at the moment. Is there like a drive for something that's coming from within for you, like to achieve equity for people in America to get access to all these different types of services? Because I know, looking at the website, there's a lot of mission and a lot of purpose conversation going through that.
There is. And I think for me, what drew me to Nava and what's really kept me there,
Hmm.
has been the intersection of a few things that Nava
Hmm.
has that feels kind of unique. First, there's the people who work
Yeah.
there. So the folks at Nava are super talented. It's one of the reasons we've been able to get really interesting work that I don't think I would have been able to do at any other organization. Even some of those big consultancies, you said that will get, really large scale government contracts. Um, so we've got the people, we've got the culture. Nava's a really value and mission driven organization, which, I think if you've gotten the privilege to be able to work at a few different places, different kinds of consultancies, different sort of social impact organizations, I find that there is something really critical that plants in the culture of the organization.
Yeah.
Kind of attracts, good people who I want to be around and want to be doing this work with. So I really appreciate that about Nava. And I appreciate that it was so serious for the founders that they built it into the legal structure of the organization,
Yeah.
right? We must be acting in the public interest. Um, and then over time, I think those two things have really allowed Nava to build this deep well of delivery experience, specifically in the public interest technology and civic
Hmm.
technology space, which this is sort of changing now, but certainly when I joined, there were organizations that were super, super mission driven, but were maybe nonprofits, and
Yeah.
couldn't get some of these big contracts. So couldn't build up the delivery experience, even though that the advocacy and the point of view and the approach to design was maybe something that would have been compelling for me.
Mm.
Um, and so, yeah, just over time, it's continued to be an even more compelling portfolio, a place where we're able to attract the kinds of work that I think are really impactful and interesting. And yeah,
Yeah.
they've kept me around. Yeah.
It seems like the team as well, there's a nice balance visually when I look at the kind of people that you have in the team. So there seems to be an inclusivity that's going right through from leadership all the way down to the bottom. I'm not getting paid for this podcast. It sounds like I'm selling Nava. I'm not, but it just seems like, all of the things that we talk about within design have kind of been executed really nicely in terms of the language and also the offering and also the team. It's an inclusive team. I can see pretty straight away.
Yeah.
Can you talk about some of the work that you actually get to do in these pieces? Because there's a lot of designers out there at the moment who, first of all, are looking for work, especially in America. The theme in our community this month in particular is ageism in design. And I
Hmm.
noticed that there are people there that don't look like they're in their 20s, which is amazing.
Yeah.
So there seems to be something that goes right through there. So for anyone who's out there in America who hasn't heard of Nava and wants to do impactful work, this looks like it's a decent organization to maybe get in contact with. But I want to learn more around some of the kind of works you get to do, because you said you're a service designer, and I want to understand what that looks like, because there's people out there that say they're service design and they don't
Yeah.
really get to do service design. So I'd love to learn a little bit more what that work looks like.
Sure. And now I'm wondering if you'll consider.
No, I'm not saying that there's not a
uh,
parameter here. Like that's not service design. It's
sure.
it's not like that at all. But especially one of the bits when I see on the website, like it's for
Yeah.
digital services, I want to understand a little bit more around the inclusivity and how you actually design for that kind of case of people who aren't on within the threshold for owning a smartphone. What does that
Sure.
look like? How does the service degrade?
Ooh, we've added a constraint. Okay, people without a smartphone. I'll switch my example. I was going to give you two examples. One of which was a service without a screen, because I think that's
Okay, yeah,
for service
nice.
designers. But I'll maybe we get into that one second. I think the example I'll share with you first is our work with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So at Nava, we were really lucky to get to work with Massachusetts to help launch its first digital native service, as they were calling it, for paid family and medical leave. And so the Massachusetts legislature passed a law saying that workers in the Commonwealth were entitled to paid leave if they got sick, or if someone in their family got sick and they were taking time off to care for them, or if they'd had a child or adopted a child, and they were going to spend time with them.
Mm.
So this became, a benefit that most workers in the Commonwealth were entitled to. And the legislature had written into law that it needed to launch in January of 2021. And
That's nice of them.
Nava, yeah, and Nava our contract came online in December of 2019. So we had about 1 year to launch a service that did not exist. Just there was nothing. And I really want to emphasize for folks who are thinking about going into this work how unusual that is.
Mm.
Most of the time, a lot of government programs have just been around forever. It's hard to create a new one. So this was a very um, unique project. So from that perspective, the service design, we have a bunch of lenses we want to look at all at once. We have, well, what are the major touch points and systems that we're going to need in order to facilitate this service experience well? And just at the highest level, if you can imagine, well, a person is going to need to apply. Their employer will conceivably have some input into this process. So they might need another website, maybe. Their doctor will probably have some input into their process. So they'll need something. From some other work, I'll give a little spoiler now.
Mm.
Doctors did not want another website, so they've got to provide their information somehow to this service. The frontline staff will, need to manage these cases and process these applications. So we'll need that. We're going to need some APIs that connect everything, and we're moving money around. So we're going to need a way of calculating someone's benefit and then getting that money to them.
Yeah.
In the broadest of strokes, you can begin to see the shape of the service a little
Yeah,
bit,
it's
at
nice.
least the big buckets that we're going to have to design into. Um, and then when we went a level deeper, we were looking at, well, who's going to use this service, and what are kind of the differentiators that might give them a very different sort of experience. So these are archetypes, right? And we found something that I think won't shock any of these researchers or service designers in the call, but we found there were three big buckets, and they really differentiated themselves along the lines of access to support,
Mm-hmm.
right? And sort of perceived agency within the system. So there were folks who sort of in the most that they were going to have the easiest time getting through this service. It's like these are people who are usually salaried workers. They get benefits at their job, so that's like vacation time, health insurance, and things
Yeah.
like that. And not only did they feel just generally like entitled to the benefit, they sort of saw like, oh yes, this is obviously for me. They also had the support of their organization's, human resources department or whoever was going to facilitate them through that application. So they were kind of going to get this benefit no matter what.
Mm.
We could have designed it quite poorly and they probably would have gotten it. That second group looked like people who would probably be able to access the benefit, but might need to struggle through it a little bit. So, folks who own small businesses maybe were kind of on their own, but generally felt like I can figure this out and I am probably entitled to this. And then there were folks who generally did not accrue benefits at their job. So these are people who maybe work shifts or hourly, don't get paid time off, maybe don't even get health insurance covered because of the nature of their work, and would just assume that this wasn't for them anyway. And usually did not, maybe worked at a company that was so large that they didn't know the human resources department or who they would even contact, or or there may not be one where they work. Maybe it's a more informal operation. And those folks, those were the people who are going to have a really hard time, right?
Mm.
That's kind of the case where you need to design in the most accessibility, the most sort of outreach, that kind of thing. And so those were our big archetypes. And now you can sort of see the constraints we're putting into, oh, okay, here's how we need to make this work as from a service design perspective.
So in that scenario, the client, that was a government agency, is that right? So you've got a client there that may not have any idea between the difference between a service designer and a design researcher and a user experience designer and so forth. What's the relationship there between Nava and that client, in example? Because in my experience, there's a lot of people working in that design team. How are they paid? I mean, I'm trying to understand the dynamics between that client and Nava. Because I know there's, when I look at the website and I was researching it there when I was on my holidays, actually, believe it or not, the Gates Foundation have got some sort of involvement with Nava. So I want to understand the dynamics between you and the client, and also where the Gates Foundation comes into play.
Sure. Um,
Getting into the weeds.
yeah. So let's see. I'll answer the first part of the
Yeah.
question first. So, and this applies to, any client that we work with
Hmm.
at Nova. Um, while this is changing through the advocacy efforts of many, many people, including folks at Nava, um, in general, the adoption of design and design principles in the government agencies has been a slow
Yeah.
process over the last 15 years,
Hmm.
longer in the UK. I also think Ireland has been doing some really interesting work the last time I spoke to folks there. Um, and so, in general, when we're coming into an agency, there's no assumption that the folks we're going to be working with on the government side know or care, you know,
Yeah.
what about the weeds of good design. But in general, there's enough sort of familiarity and fluency that government agencies will ask us, for
Okay.
human-centered design or user research. And while that's not always the case, there is a level of, sort of client services work to be done there to kind of make the case for
Hmm.
why and how the human-centered design approach is going to make a more effective service,
Yeah.
why it's worth investing that time. And we need to be flexible, right? We need to
Hmm.
be um, able to design in the user research we need, the testing we need to do in a way that is still going to fulfill the needs and expectations of certainly of the government folks working on a project. But also, sometimes this funding has specific milestones built in, or
Okay.
we're trying to get into production as quickly as possible. So there are trade-offs that we need to do along with making sure that we're sort of bringing government partners along with us.
Yeah, because for me, like, I was trying to understand, and I still am trying to understand, is this a new model for government kind of service design, and how they're actually procuring it? Because there are functions I know within American government where there are service designers. Um, do do you work with that level of kind of implementation, so you encourage service design to become more prolific within areas of the American government? Is that one
Yes.
of your tasks when you're working to create a new service? That example that you gave, you also cultivate the kind of the environment and the ecosystem for design to thrive.
Yes. To the extent that we can. Uh,
Yeah.
and I'll share another example of
Hmm.
our work with the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So again, this is the agency that manages the really large health insurance programs
Sure.
in the US. Um, and so back when I joined Nava in 2017, one of the big initiatives in that space was called the Quality Payment Program. And
Hmm.
so, excuse me,
That's it.
this was thinking, this was part of a law called the Macro Law that I think passed in the US in 2015 that sort of directed that agency to begin to Medicare, which is like the big one in the
Yeah.
US. This is how we get health insurance to older people who are very sick, etc. I think there's like 65 million or something, just a huge number of people. So they wanted to move that program from being value based, which means that, if you go to the doctor 3 times and they'll maybe do 3 blood tests, and they'll charge the government for 3 blood tests.
Yeah.
So quality based. So maybe the first time you go in, your doctor does the blood test, and the second time they give you some, sort of they refer you to nutrition counseling or physical therapy, or something that's going to help improve your health outcomes, that might qualify that doctor for like a quality payment. So trying to
Mm.
push the US out of this like crazy healthcare, kind of fiasco into more quality based care. And one of the things that they needed, which is what Nava was brought in for, was they needed a way for Medicare providers, so everyone from individual doctors to huge hospital groups, to be able to submit Medicare quality data.
Yeah.
Right? It needed to be able to submit measures, we had to be able to analyze them and generate, whatever that quality score was. And so Nava was asked to create what's called the Submissions API, the QPP, Quality Payment Program
Mm.
Submissions API. So I came in as the design lead on that project. And in this case, the users are uh, the developers who helped doctors
Okay.
integrate the API with their health record system. And this was a voluntary program in its first year. And we needed to figure out a way to make it compelling enough for industry developers and the organizations they work for to decide to integrate with our API.
Right.
The service design there is then like, well, what is their yearly, sort of planning cycle? How does it align with the program
Yeah.
cycle, which is also on a yearly kind of rotation. And then what do we need to provide for them to make this easy? How do we make it a business case that, the VP of development can make a case for it? How do we make it easier for the developers? So, that now we're user testing the API documentation and getting feedback on that
Okay.
as a designer, and creating, beta periods and sandboxes that they can practice the integration with. And
It sounds pretty cool from
it's
a human
cool.
centered design perspective that you're actually getting to go pretty deep into the weeds as regards, APIs and all this. Most
Yeah.
of the time, whenever I've been working, you don't really have to get down into the nuts and bolts. Usually, the developers, you kind of meet them at that point. But it sounds like you're actually working, at a very kind of low level of Zoom, if you want, around the data structures and the technical documentation and so forth.
We are. Yeah.
You are. So, as regards, I know there was in the notes for this episode, there was something that we needed to cover off, which was
Yeah.
the benefits data trust.
Yeah.
Now, what is this? Because I'm not sure that everybody knows about the Gates Foundation.
Sure.
If you're in this world, like I've done some work for the Gates Foundation before,
Oh,
maybe tell me a little bit about Nava's kind of got an organization here, provides services to government agencies. Where does Bill and Melinda get into this conversation?
yes.
They're philanthropists. They drop some money in. Do they own the business?
No.
No, I know that.
No.
Tell me
Nava is
it.
actually workaround.
I know, yeah. Oh, it's a
Um,
workaround as well. God, very cool.
uh,
So they provide money, capital to keep the business going. Is that correct?
uh, Not exactly. So, and it's good we're talking about this at this point in the conversation, because I think we established a good base for what
Yeah.
is Nava. Nava is effectively a government contractor, right?
Yeah.
Or we are a government contractor, right? That's the vast majority of Nava's business
Hmm.
is contracting directly with government agencies.
Sure.
And so, a little more recently, we've been working on this over the last almost 2 years, but very recently we actually launched a new division called Nava Labs. And so myself and a colleague, Marcel Esposito, leading that launch, and this is a philanthropically funded division that is really the research and development arm. So we're focused on proving out value and mitigating risks through piloting with government agencies, academic institutions, partners, nonprofits, things like that, to really enhance different practices, maybe technologies the government isn't quite ready to buy, or where we want to establish a little more credibility and proof points, and advocate for the adoption of those things into government agencies. Our first project in Nava Labs was actually not with the Gates Foundation. It was with the state of Montana and a few other states in the U.S. In partnership with an organization called the National WIC Association to develop an API standard for a U.S. program called WIC, stands for Women, Infants, and Children. And so
Women
this
and what?
is Women, Infants, and Children.
Okay,
Um,
women. Okay,
so
very
it's
good.
a bit, if you're familiar with a program called SNAP, which used to be called food stamps in the
Yeah.
US, it's a bit like that in that there's like a supplementary food budget, but there's still a healthcare component to WIC. So that was our first novel last project. Our second one, which is the one you were asking about,
Mm,
is a partnership with a nonprofit called Benefits Data Trust, which is funded by the Gates Foundation and Google.org to help explore the potential for generative
okay.
AI and automation to help government staff
So it's a
refer.
standalone business. It's not, Nava working alongside one of these organizations that the Gates Foundation sort of instigated, I guess, or funded.
Can you ask me that again? I'm not
So did
sure.
they did the Gates Foundation set up the benefit, what is it again? The Benefits Data Trust? That's a Gates
Oh,
Foundation organization.
no, they're a nonprofit who's also funded
Okay.
by Gates Foundation. But they're great. They're their own business. They're a nonprofit that operates in, I believe, 7 states. They help people enroll in SNAP. They also have some interesting work around student loan support in the US. Sorry, I'm trying to keep myself from using all these acronyms that are
No, I
just
know it's okay. I know there's a few of the ones in here. I'm looking at their website and I'm like, wow, the vernacular and all of this stuff is very, I don't know, it's a different world almost. I can imagine you get sucked into using acronyms all the time.
It is, and it can seem intimidating and really exclusive, and
Yeah,
it is, but it's also it is learnable. I wouldn't want anyone to hear this and think like, "Oh my gosh, this is so jargony.
yeah.
I couldn't get into that word." It's like, don't worry about the acronyms. Yeah,
So tell us about Benefits Data Trust because it's a partnership. Then
it
is what I'm
is.
hearing. It's a partnership between Nava and Benefits Data Trust.
It's
What
right.
do they do? Because on the website it's about accessing government assistance for food and
Right.
is that correct?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And so one of the ways that they do that is they operate call centers in 7 states where people can call in and they can get support applying for food assistance in the U.S. And this is a really critical part of their service because it's the overlap there that is enabling us to do some really interesting prototyping and pilot work. Right now, we're prototyping a tool and hope to pilot it with a focus on helping those people who answer the phone. We call them benefits navigators, really broadly. So this is people who help people apply for social services. Either on the phone or in person, or sometimes librarians in the U.S. will kind of also serve this purpose. So we're focusing on how benefit navigators who are supporting people and their families can use those touch points to refer their clients to a more holistic set of services. So you can imagine if someone needs help paying for food, they might also need help with some other things like
Yeah, absolutely.
they may need help getting access to healthcare. They may need help, even accessing local community resources like food banks or, kind of any of the other sort of large
Yeah.
services that could support that.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a pretty noble organization, and it's something that I imagine the team at Nav are excited to get stuck into. When was that partnership announced, Genevieve?
So we actually announced this. It's been running for just a little while. We officially kicked off in November, but we had our big official public announcement just last month. So you're catching us just I think
Right at
3
the
weeks.
start.
Yeah, right at the start. At least publicly. Anyway, but our team's been running for a few months now.
So, as regards the work that you're doing, um, at Nava, I know you're in there, you're senior, you've been there for 7 years. Can you talk to us about some of the biggest challenges that you're faced with when you're working across so many different projects that can sometimes stretch you? And the reason why I'm asking this question is a lot of designers paint the picture of, oh, if only I could get a job where I make an impact. I want to make an impact. And like, trust me, I coach enough designers. I know that this is really high in the agenda for a lot of people, especially post COVID.
Yes.
What does it look like on a day-to-day basis? Are you working on one dedicated project at a time? Probably not. But tell me, what does it look like? And maybe just to follow on that question, what are the kind of challenges that you're faced as a practitioner working across these complex systems?
Yeah, well, first I want to say that I also hear that a lot from designers who are either
Yeah,
looking to move into this space from,
sure.
maybe industry or consumer products. Um, and I really empathize with them because I did it the hard way, where I just only worked in
Yeah,
social impact technology until that finally worked out for me. And thank goodness that it did. Uh, and what I would say is one of the reasons I've stayed at Nama is because I have found a sustainable place to do this work.
mm,
So uh, prior to Nava, like I said, I was at the mayor's office. Before that, I did a combination of working for a smaller design firm that also had a social impact focus. I also had my own practice for a while before that. And to be honest, it was exhausting. It was really hard. It's hard to work for a politician in the mayor's office. Even though you're right next to the mission, right? You're right up close to it.
yeah,
It's I didn't find it sustainable to be in that position. And then at a smaller firm, the projects were kind of not at the scale that I wanted, and I was also trying to do a lot of the sort of pitching and deliveries, or doing all of it at once, which can also be really exhausting.
yeah,
Um, One of the things I've appreciated about Nava is that, we're really bringing in, for the most part, pretty long projects. Um, we have people on projects here for usually about a year before we move them to another one. And so most you kind of individual contributors, so folks who are either a design lead or a designer researcher, or content strategist, or maybe front end designer, they'll stay on the project for about a year. And rarely will we have people work on more than one project at once. So that's sort of one way we've tried to make it
sure.
sustainable. Um, as a director, I am not on one project, but I do have the benefit of being able to support people who are on a single
Single
project.
project.
And so that it doesn't really feel like a stretch anymore. It feels like kind of a privilege
Yeah,
because they're really doing the work, but I'm,
you're
kind
dipping
of
in.
helping in any way I can, scrubbing in if they really need me. Um, but otherwise, able to support there. But
Mm,
I would say the challenges for us are really not so much coming from being stretched across multiple
sure.
projects. I think the challenges governments still come from, a few different places. I think we're still really pushing in many cases for sort of the basics,
Yeah.
in terms of this is what human-centered design and practice really looks like, and this is
Mm,
how to do it. And here are kind of the hard conversations we need to have around trading off maybe the 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 whole universe of scope, that this
yeah.
agent want to get it to something really solid and sort of MVP level. Um, those things are still really hard. Sometimes it's hard to get, user research approved in those settings because it's such a risk averse
Yeah.
environment. And then, and that's also one of the reasons that we set up Nava Labs, is, this generative AI project sounds really cool, super buzzwordy, but because we are able to work with Benefits Data Trust to, one, kind of have this very contained pilot that is not actually
Yeah.
like a agency, and that has kind of the guardrails of a caseworker looking at it and telling us like if this tool is just putting out complete nonsense or if it's actually doing something helpful. We are kind of protecting the government from being accused of like wasting lots of public money on a technology that's still emerging.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and we're protecting sort of that client, that caller that is just trying to they're just trying to help buy food for their
Yeah.
family, right? Like they don't care about all this stuff. So it's another way of kind of mitigating the sort of like high stakes environment that we're often
Yeah.
in the government agencies.
Can I ask you, with the current state of American politics at the moment and the future, does that impact organizations like Nava when, and people listen to the podcast know that I'm not a major fan of Donald Trump. So if his, God forbid, election as a second president, what impact would that have for the likes of Nava when they're trying to do human-centered design work across the states?
Yeah, well,
What's the risk there?
one of the interesting things that we saw in the first Trump administration, and I'll be clear, I don't want that to happen.
Yeah, yeah. Not many people do who are in the
Absolute
design world.
worst case scenario. We were very lucky. Our business continued and we were able to do good work
Yeah,
um, under the first Trump administration. And what really happened that we saw was a lot of money got pushed to the states. So suddenly the states kind of became the place where the really kind of interesting, leading edge, groundbreaking work started to happen.
as opposed to the
Um,
federal level.
that's right. Yeah. Whereas, under the Obama administration, that healthcare.gov event saw the founding of the U.S. Digital Service in the
Yeah,
White House, of 18F within GSA, which is like a in government design and technology consultancy.
yeah,
Um, those organizations continued and they're still around now. But the work really got pushed out to the states. And so I imagine there would be some level of that. But there are also uh, there are just any number of high stakes situations, ranging from, what is the government's role in certain uses of AI, such as around facial recognition, um, etc. And then, of course, there's always like, what does the funding landscape look like
yeah,
for its programs that we work on at Nava? And I think that's always a concern. Um,
yeah. Within that
yeah,
administration, how much they provide, and
that's right. Yeah,
yeah, so it could impact the business negatively at some point. Like, so, here's hoping that doesn't happen.
agreed.
So yeah, we'll wait and see. Genevieve, there's a lot of stuff that we've covered off at a very kind of top level here. Is there anything else you want to really mention and give a shout out to the listeners? Maybe there's people you're looking to hire in the future within Nava. If so, we can put a link to the Nava website. But now's a chance. Do the selling.
Sure. Yeah, well, I will say for the Nava Labs work, this really is this isn't something that I've seen other organizations that look like Nava do
Yeah,
before. And so that's really exciting to me. It feels like a doubling down of our values around stewarding the public technology ecosystem, and I think just from an AI perspective, it's a really interesting sort of take on looking at how we can use these tools to augment people's work and actually better support a workforce that
yeah,
already, beleaguered, already has lots of high turnover, rather than sort of eliminate any human interaction that might take
Sure.
place between navigators and the public. And one of the things that we do as part of Nava Labs is, advocate then for what are the policy changes that might need to happen, or how could these practices and technologies be adopted responsibly
Yeah.
back into government. Again, this isn't something that we're seeing a ton of delivery organizations, really decide they want to
Yeah.
get their hands messy with. And so I'm really lucky she's not on the podcast today, but to have started Nava Labs with Martella Esposito. She's a policy expert at Nava. And so one of the things, in addition to just the software we're building, the insights we're generating out of our practices, we're also planning on sharing what we learn and contributing to that policy discussion around the ethical use of AI in the social safety net. And for folks who are looking for, interested in working at Nava, I would say, we need designers to take part of that. We need engineers
Absolutely.
and product folks. And we also need policy experts who are willing to really dive into what it means to implement these policies, right? There's the policy layer, but then there's like, what does that look like in practice? How do you turn that into an API that does what you need to do, or
Yeah.
a piece of software? And I think that's really the expression of democracy, right? It's like, well, what happens on the ground? You can write whatever you want into law, into policy, but
Sure.
the way that it looks and the way you interact with it is ultimately kind of who we are and what we're
Yeah,
deciding
absolutely.
to provide to each other.
Well, look, Genevieve, I'll throw a link to your own LinkedIn as well, because I see you're active on LinkedIn, and I'll put a link to the Nava website as well for people who do want to get in touch and maybe inquire about opportunities as they arise. But listen, look, I always end the episodes in This Is HCD by thanking the guests for their time and ultimately their vulnerability, because we don't do questions up front in this podcast. So it's a question of just me being curious and asking probing questions and going left and right and weaving, ducking and diving. So thanks for putting up with my weaving type questions. I really enjoyed speaking with you today. So listen, best of luck with the continued success at Nava, and we'd love to have you on the show again at some point.
Thank you. I would love that. Amazing.